Good afternoon and welcome to Open Classroom. I'm Janet Gillow, the Director of Professional Development for the Brown School, Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you so much for joining us today. For our participants on Zoom throughout this webinar, you are muted. We can't see or hear you. We also don't have a way of calling on raised hands. But the chat feature is enabled and we want you to be a part of today's conversation. I know there's a lot of love for Dr. Kirkland in this virtual room today, so please do send that our way along with your comments and questions as the presentation goes. I want to thank and acknowledge my dear friend and colleague, Cynthia Williams, the Brown School's Assistant Dean for Community Partnerships. She's my co-host for this series, and she will be in the chat with you and then also representing your voice in this space as we move to Q&A later. Before we get started, I just want to share with you that here at Open Classroom, it's February, that's Black History Month. We've got a lot going on. It's a celebration of the central role and significant contributions that African Americans have made to our nation's history, our life, and our culture. Today's webinar is a part of that, but actually with Cynthia's leadership, there's an amazing set of curated videos on our website, tributes and appreciations. You're going to want to check that out. And I'm going to send the link in the chat after I stop talking. But we've also got great webinars here at Open Classroom as part of that series. The next one is Tuesday of next week, so that's February 9th. It's a little earlier in the day for us. We'll be going at 10 a.m. But Professor Heather Cameron is bringing guests Brandon Gilliam and Tyrene Lewis to discuss Black entrepreneurship, easy for me to say, in St. Louis, building healthy families and communities. So I think that's going to be a great follow-on conversation to what we're talking about today. But now it is my very great pleasure to pass the microphone to Mary McKay, the Nydorf Family and Centene Dean Corporation, Centene Corporation Dean of the Brown School. I don't do the talking very well today. Dean, please take it away.
Wonderful. So thank you, Janet, and thank you for all your leadership as you raised Open Classroom along with our colleagues at the Brown School to something of deep meaning. Again, my name is Mary McKay. I have the privilege of being the Dean of the Brown School, and my official job, Professor Kirkland, is to introduce you. But before I do that, Jack, because I have the chat scrolling in my view, you have so many friends, champions, some who go back all the way to 1978 and your Department of Transportation days. Gina Chowa's on here, Karen Stewart, Harvey Fields. I mean, there are people from the university, from the community, from different parts of your history. And that's going to lead me up into the introduction of Professor Jack Kirkland. My goodness, what does it mean to contribute to an institution for more than 50 years? What kind of mark do you make on that institution? How do you shape it? How do you support it? How do you challenge it to be better? Professor Kirkland has modeled for us a lifetime of both growing what's important to make this world more just and fair and equitable, speaking truth within an institution, partnering with communities to really advance the good in what is in all of us, but to challenge us to do good constantly. Professor, I have only known you for the 5 years that I've been here at the Brown School. You have taught me much in 5 years. So imagine how somebody who dates back to 1978 feels, or Cynthia Williams. It's a privilege to elevate you today and your remarks. And I will forever feel privileged to have been your colleague and part of this journey. You have taught me things, your wisdom, your challenge to be really the best, and not the best for yourself so that you become more famous, but the best for each of us, that we live better lives, and then particularly to really address the disproportionate burden that structural racism places in the way of Black children and their families and their communities. All I can say is we have tremendous respect for you, Professor, and my hope is that we're all here to celebrate your 75th anniversary and then beyond. So with that, Professor Kirkland, and thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Janet, and thank you all that have said hello in the chat, and keep those well wishes coming. Happy 50th anniversary, Jack.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate our 5 years of history, Mary. Mary, you've been a fantastic dean. And to have been asked or to have been challenged to talk about the situations that I've experienced. I want to couch my talk in the concept of where we came from, where we are going, how we're going to get deliberated. And I'd like to share it with you so it can allow you to leave with a great deal of discussion in your own heads. But those of you who know me know that giving a paper is not something that I do. I actually have much give and take. And in the process of that, we can be together for hours. And many of you know that you've been in classes with me for 4 hours at a clip. So let me just make some comments here, extended comments, I might say, about Black History Month. You know, there are many things that I could say about Black History Month. One is, well, it's about time. If such information is carefully and courageously inserted within the pages of white history, we might get a little better and truer picture of both histories. The Black agony endured, energy and imagination wasted, untapped prowess of a Black people that's lost both to themselves and to a nation, and much of which has been lying fallow for 4 centuries as the result of being unused. Much of which has been unused for 400 years. And as a result of this, both people, Black and white, have experienced loss. One, hostage in chains and physical and mental conflict, inspirational and aspirational limits. And the other, are people chained by their own psychological hysteria of color. Prior to the selection for this celebrated event, we now call Black History Month, suffice it to say that there were many rumblings going on the national scene against it. Before the shortest month of the year was selected and established as such, I was an assistant professor and part of such advocacy in organizations at St. Louis University, where I was in protest for a Black Studies program there. This was prior to my arrival at Washington University a year later, 1970. I became the co-founder and associate director of Black Studies, along with Dr. Robert L. Williams, who served as director. The reverberations and fallout of such a happening was still going on my first year here, as I settled in a very hostile environment with a few friends who gave support to our efforts. I've been on this planet long enough to have made many round trips, and some have seen many many views of me, and I've played out many roles in many arenas. I could talk about politics, persons, personalities, and problems as I respond to my Blackness, both pro and con. But what I've decided to do is to share with you my view of America from the Black side, as I have seen it, how it was, how it is, and how we can speculate on how it can become better, or agonize and the speculation of how it can and will become worse. The understanding and underlying issue of America is, has been, and will continue to be race, regardless to any issue that tries to seek camouflage within it, because it is and has always been the unresolved problem in America that has been hoped and wished to just go away, to be hushed and made quiet by the offering of incremental crumbs. So then, why Black History Month? Candidly, I believe it was a throwaway gift to Blacks out of white guilt. It is my belief that it was thought that it would assuage the loud noises and heavy thunder at the time, and would be considered the pacifier against mounting angry confrontations. I believe that the white thought compromise was to reluctantly submit this low-hanging fruit for peace, something that could be quietly surrendered, because it was rendered to be nothing of great value and not a sizable loss, and could be made at little cost, and could be offered as the sacrifice of goodwill to satisfy the moment, as there were no white setbacks or residue in the giving. There was little or nothing of value in what was highly pretended to be a reluctant, hard trade off. And anyway, what harm could it possibly do in the long run? I speculate that the logic was that this was at best, a weird demand of Blacks, although hotly contested by white, challenge for to be. The chance to look backwards, they thought this is what Blacks were after and asking for. And this was very incremental progress that had been made in slavery and post-slavery. So it was used, it could not be held for anything of great significance. It would make very little difference in the usual flow of business, like the standardized intelligence tests, or given any Black any advantage in college entrance exams. It would be nothing that would make Blacks more competitive with white students for entry into any major elite university in this country. And the thought that this would not enable Blacks to get a better view of tomorrow, and that this would and could be a valve to relieve and release the pressure for the moment of time, with such that might be perceived to be only a hollow victory, then time indeed was the great victory, once again won as previously. For it was presumed if Blacks were fixed on yesterday for their view of progress, rather than today or tomorrow, you will have mitigated the tomorrow by limiting and controlling the opportunity of each day, which would be translated basically that there was no real progress. Business as usual in the Black struggle, with Blacks having won an empty prize. But looking out of the rearview mirror can be of great value and perspective. Even might not even give an excellent view of where you've been, but allows one to see all that one has contributed, both uncompensated and unappreciated, and causes one to ponder even more deeply why one has not taken greater advantage of this past journey and has not been further enhanced in citizenship and prosperity. Such thoughts erupt with the power of a geyser, even if you are still wearing mental and metal shackles. And then you realize you have to submit or to feign submission, even while in a state of deep contemplation, as you realize at the very moment that you're looking out of the wrong glass, which must command your attention and focus. It is the awakening to knowing where you desire to go that is important, and not where you are being driven and taken. And that you must set your own compass for your own journey. You acknowledge that you are the driver of your own future and your own destiny. Conceiving and imagining that you are the driver of your future and mapping and designing your own destination, your own journey to freedom, in fact, first-class citizenship, and imagining what you will do when you arrive now become the paramount consideration. So, why Black studies? Came along upon the city, became more enlightened, aware of who they were. They read and traveled broadly, how to best get to where they wanted to travel. They learned that they were drivers of nations, indeed, continent, and had received both recognition and esteem and political acumen. And as eye-opening as this was, Blacks were not terribly surprised by what they learned. This was just a long delayed confirmation. They had suspected this to be so for generations, but without validation. They had heard about the mental and economic prowess of Blacks. You see bits and embedded in the thoughts and imaginations of Blacks. Parents had always told Black children about the Black characters in the Bible and the stories of Black heroes, which stories are familiar to many, the traditionally safe stories, and Blacks have had this information long before this hallowed February. But now these true and new characters were compared and composed of Blacks who took the second place, never, who commanded respect by rank and office, and the list of such Blacks is endless. They were dressed up and presented to Black young and old. And now Blacks were elated and spoused out such comments as, "I told you so," and had bragging rights of such order. Because whites have compulsion to read and listen to another ethnic group's annals of glory, who were equal or more so listed in the long historical line of those already currently known as evidence that no Black grant or no Black giant in any endeavor is an accident. As admitted by their own white teachers, Blacks who had never gotten beyond the Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, George Barber, and who had, and occasionally and secretly, desired to read about those bad boys, Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prouser, Nat Turner, those who were militant and now considered safe Blacks to talk about in the public arena. And yet, even Malcolm X has been somewhat tenderized and permitted to be read and talked about in schools. And yes, the recent discovery of the open militancy of the late Dr. Martin Luther King is being reanalyzed. All Black militants in the nature of Patrick Henry for the same cause, yes, all Blacks, and they were great. The litany is endless. And this time they learned about Blacks who took the slave master on for self-respect and dignity and freedom. And the promised delivery of rights espoused in the document called the Declaration of Independence. And imagine, they learned that it was Blacks who brought the Europeans to America, not the other way around. And that they served on the ships as sailors in the hold as cargo. That they were the navigators of ships that came with Columbus, came to this continent before Columbus. And even now, the Black man got to America before the European arrived in their own ships and planted the evidence, the pyramids on the North American continent. Yes, in 1970 was the beginning of Black awakening. It was the inauguration of Black History Month at many schools. It was America, in white America. And the March to Freedom was officially begun. Black Studies gave Black youth sitting in hot, musty, uncooled, urban academic warehouses and urban ghettos in segregated grades, K through 12, themselves a human being, and demanded to be treated as full human beings. Black students agreed with Frederick Douglass I swear to the Lord, I can't see why democracy means everyone but me. And being students in civics, Blacks could see far beyond the words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. They saw saw the hypocrisy of democracy. And all they needed was the music. They already had the cadence and the rhythm for marching. And when Dr. Martin Luther King said, at the very, very site where the Capitol was in the background on January 6th, insurrection, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. These words echoed off the walls of the slave castles in West Africa that I visited and cried, off the docks of every slave ship that ever sailed, and every plantation that ever held Blacks hostage. That same message in song, we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. We once called this the Civil Rights Movement. It was the confrontation of the conscience of America, the X-ray that showed no conscience. We sought integration and got desegregation, change, but little progress. Now, the Black Lives Matter movement has been firmly launched, demanding social, economic, and political justice. And the movement is heard by free people everywhere who honor their freedom and reach out and lift all to the same standard. It is a movement that moves and stirs the souls of all people. It is propelled by the energies, which his famous statement was, I may not get there with you, but we're gonna all get there. The whole words and tunes were in step and in time with the change that was taking place in the world. Through Black studies, youth saw the great uplift for freedom initiated from African nations. This wind for freedom was blowing and uplifting Blacks from all over the world. Diaspora was caught up in the dance and the song of freedom, bringing a fresh breeze of this commonness of a God-given gift and the singleness of struggle, uplifting all Blacks and freeing the conscience of people all over the world to unload guilt of assumption for the right to and the acceptance of special treatment, to realize that white pigmentation is just another color among the many others. That, as such, I remember being in elementary school with all the young people who had crayon boxes, but the only crayons that were very seldom used were Black. Our world was Black. Our love was Black. Yes, we knew that Black was beautiful, but we had to hear it in the full-throated chorus coming from our own lips in defiance to what we had been told by every white symbol of white purity and superiority put before us. Black is beautiful counter response to what we had been forced to deny, even dare only in exercise of peril to express. You see, when you relate to history, you do not start in the middle of history. You have to start at the beginning, because that is what history is. And when you churn the waters of multinational history, and multinational, multicultural history. And in doing so, you invariably reveal the blended history of mankind. And from the beginning of that history, you are immediately exposed to the highly advanced Black civilization and heritage of Blacks in Africa. Here you would see revealed and revered the full truth and heritage of all mankind. And in doing so, Blacks would be seeing self as equals to all others in stature. It is here in this observation where the intelligent man would question, how could this thing slavery be? How can a country professing it is founded on the foundation and roots of Christendom do such a dastardly and demeaning thing to man? This thing of defining one human lesser than another human on the basis of pigmentation. Maligned, it must be damaged, deranged, scarred, and must undergo many surgeries and transformations to be made whole. Consequently, and conveniently, history that is read in our universities and public schools is not a Black history of heritage in Africa. This is purposely co-opted for political reasons. What we learned is the history of Blacks living in oppression and under servitude in America. And when something else is making history and being told that it's the history of Blacks, it is leading the Black youngster away from what would be the truth and the heritage by the youth being exposed to something that is disparaging and something of disrespect. It is the story. It is his story, and it is as we hear. What becomes the history is one of subjugation. It is a story of people seen unworthy of quality and stature of the white. A difference between history and the history of experience of Blacks in America. Black history in America is one which diminishes and dismisses Black heritage. It is one that does not relate to the control and dominance of Black conquest, exploration, settlement, as that presented of the white experience. It is one of blended cultures and one of subservience and socialization of the Black. It is a story of how the Blacks were made Negroes and allowed gradients of presumed upward mobility, often under different and given nomenclatures. One would allow and could allow Blacks to presume a greater status on a broader range of acceptability and movement, while experiencing the same or similar sanctions of movement horizontally, but seldom vertically, while being depreciated in every entrance of this new status nomenclature. And it asks, and is asked to agree under dominance and suppression and pretense that the individual is receiving and enjoying incremental progress. Example, public accommodation. The different two Black history books one spoke of an exploration and conquest by mankind and his environment. The one by Black Africa, free to dominate and guide its destiny. The other is written by the European and by individuals from the continent, where Blacks become socialized and seasoned to the culture in which they were enslaved. But it was only the former books of the African conquest that were always unfound in the so-called prestigious libraries. Or rather, the hidden manna was put away in the attic or hidden in the basement in these highly revered schools. And if found, it was done so accidentally. And if it were boldly used by very brave students on their papers, those papers were frequently downgraded for using such unacceptable references. Yes, right here at Washington University and at Harvard too. On the other hand, the history of oppression of Blacks was highly available and applauded as those well written. Another picture of the Black world experience were not considered good enough to be put on the class requirement lists or sufficiently of sufficient quality to be placed among the bunch on the hallowed scholarly shelves. And junior teachers were often denied tenure and or advancement because these were the references that they stood by. But they were not acceptable because the references were not regarded as valid. It was because the overseeing professors who had the authority to deny tenure often denied it on the basis of the unacceptability of the worth and validity of such references. These were so-called scholars who were ignorant and racist. Yes, even today, you can grow and be growing up in America and attending one of the so-called best universities and graduating totally ignorant of the history of Black people. And yet, be considered outstanding scholar and taught by outstanding scholars. Those who are still preparing you for the world that they lived in and not the one in which you are and have to go back into. And help others to manage and survive. And you can return back with head held high, calling yourselves a scholar and holding the highest degree that a university can grant, while unconsciously or consciously denying other individuals, that is, people of color, their full self-esteem. This is the main institution which spawns institutionalized racism, schools. Therefore, it is folly to use the term systemic racism. Systems are anonymous. Systems are anonymous. Who can accuse a faceless system of anything? It is unmasked. It is the unmasked people hovering behind the system. This is the reason that such individuals should be called out, and why this phenomena should rightly be called institutionalized racism. And a snapshot of this collective behavior was valid and considered vogue, and was justified January 6th at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. It was a classic example of the mutation of racism, which flows through American schools. And it's like leukemia bleeding into the bloodstream, or more so, it is embedded and is baked into America, as the conscience is, as chocolate is into a marble pound cake. This is institutionalized racism. And it is what is costing America its progress. Scaling the walls of the Capitol was an event by people of whom none could be accused of not going to school. They all went to school. But it's the curriculum, it is the diet, it is the food that is eaten that is at the baseline of why racism is denying America the opportunity to breathe freely and to advance. By some, this attack upon the Capitol, January 6th, was called an act of survival, reclaiming lost ground in the Republic. Some said that we are more separate now than we've ever been. And some said that we were never together and operating only under the guise, the illusion of cultural diversity or multiculturalism. But whatever your cause or claim, all of us have the evidence, the full evidence that America is definitely in combat. Whatever the case or charge, here we are, operating in the bold, no holds barred racial ignorance as we face our most challenging opponents on the planet. I teach and love Chinese students and have visited their country many times and have seen firsthand what I'm talking about. But a quick check of the pulse will tell you that this country is breathing down our necks, and the greatest hand has the greatest potential, as being the leader in arms, production of goods, technology, and is taking leadership in the digital revolution. Lasting the U.S. as a model of efficiency and laughing at us as a democracy, as a people working in harmony and in concert with one another, granted under concerted command and not under united will, was their plan or philosophy. But we did. Now the evidence of the challenge is in the current and early future, is in an early future projection of growth national product. This, mind you, while we are here mud wrestling with our ghosts of racial division, unassuming concern as a fight and in a fight for our national lives. For the golden ring offered as a reward in this triple three used in America, and to determine your great role in America, and who you are and what group you're in America. We do this in this country on the basis of wealth by using the simple slide rule of the following determinants. Who has the greatest advantage? Who has the greatest accumulation of the greatest wealth? And what race exercises the greatest amount of authority? We all stand on this platform of free enterprise, the big USA monopoly board, and give the highest reward based on pigmentation. This seems to some to be a way to continue, but it will not stand nor cut the muster for future progress of this nation, nor face up at home or in the world the believability of the symbol we cherish, one nation under God. We all have a choice in this strong and glorious nation. We do not have to decay from within, as do great nations do. All we must do is that what is right, that what is fair, that what is good, that is what is best for the country and for all of us. You know, a strange thing happened one day when a group were coming off of a boat. Some 401 years ago, when that Portuguese man of war ship which docked in 1619 in Virginia, it unloaded a cargo of fear, guilt, anger, and profit, with the future promise of a multicolor America. And so did the many, many other ships that follow with the same black cargo in their steamy, stinky holds. And so likewise, the many slave ships that followed. These many such unloadings severed the American conscience and ideologically split the moral spell this very day. And as we look 401 years behind us, as we look ahead, no more than a quarter of a century in the future, within 25 years, we will be looking at a country so racially mixed that it will one day be a nation with no majority groups. All ethnic groups will be minority groups in 2045. And when you add the underlying possible consequences of this eventuality, made more evident by the Georgia vote, the Jewish senator, all in the same day. And of all places, that incremental state of Black lynchings called Georgia by, and I put notice, another Black woman who literally carried the state on her back to this victory. A Southern state that either held first place or at least was easily in place for racism, for this highest honor, for voting suppression and gerrymandering, to deny Blacks the right, and at the very core, at the very crater of this smoldering inferno, is the issue of racism. We're not moving toward an ideological conflict. We're there. Before, it was called the war between the states. Today, this looming conflict is between a set of two minds, one of justice yesterday, one of justice today and tomorrow. And one must take a position on race in order to believe that in the final analysis, that we will arrive at the end line as well as other countries arriving at the end line who have resolved this particular issue. And it's an issue that has won what we know to be the truth, and that is all people are equal. You know, you can hide only so long. All people are created equal. Sooner or later, race rears its ugly head, and truth demands the honest response. It is the smoldering fact in the American life. And if we do not totally put it out by assuaging it with cooperation, social justice, this smoldering will burst into open flame. We must be ever ready with our hoses of flowing waters, of ever flowing honesty and compassion. Otherwise, the devastation of institutionalized racism, which often mutates into white liberalism, which is so often paraded facelessly, committed and uncommitted, depending on the situation, is ever before us. So, well, this paper, if I finished it, would talk about the great fact that we are moving towards a country that has no majority, but the small minorities, which are the Black and the Latino, it would move towards their becoming a political party and not just looking for planks from other parties and privilege to support them, but to be their own party and to stand firm on their own. And the thing that is really troubling this country is if Blacks and Latinos should arrive at a point of power where they can change policy in the nation, would they seek revenge? And that's a great, great issue that hides behind racism even more securely today. And which is education, can best help us see where we will be so that the whole idea of being a nation that is compassionate and does not hold to any revenge will be a nation that will live up to its purpose in the beginning. questions?
Jack, thank you so much for your presentation. You've got a lot of love coming through.
Okay.
And I also like to say to you that we had the opportunity to share your article, Self Esteem Development is a Community Effort. So the audience also got that article. And you're getting a lot of accolades saying how fabulous the presentation was. And so, as we near the end of the presentation, what I'd like for you to expand upon, Jack, because you've given us such rich reflections and information, would you talk to us a little bit more about how you saw your reflection on the January 6th assault on the Capitol, and how you, if you will, relate that to your position about systemic racism versus institutionalized racism?
Okay, let me start at the back of it first. Institutionalized racism is, I see people, I see institutions. Uh, if, if someone said that Washington University, I would definitely look at not a system. I'd look at people, and the students who are going there would identify people. They wouldn't identify a system. I mean, they might collectively come up with that conclusion, but the point is that they know who's in front of them. They know who is transmitting information to them, and they know if that information has been screened with how things should be and how things could be. But you notice I and all of my students out there know I make the distinction between education and school. School is a facility, it's a place. Education is a search for the truth. And the minute that you search for the truth, truth will not permit racism to hide behind it. So that would be one thing that I would say. And your other questions, some of the other questions that you asked, Stephanie.
It had to do with well, you addressed them actually. So as we're at the bottom of the hour, the one more question I'm going to ask you. Again, we're sharing audience the article that Professor Kirkland wants to be shared with you. Self-esteem development is a community effort. We put it back in your chat. Jack, would you talk a little bit to us with 1 minute remaining? Tell us about this militancy of Dr. Martin Luther King. There was some interest in the chat.
Well, yeah, the militancy of Dr. Martin Luther King was to give America no place to hide. For instance, if you can just think about the confrontation of, 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 of his presentation to America, where a great deal of the hiding has been behind those two great documents, the Declaration of Independence and Constitution. And when you pull the cover off and you see what is lurking and hiding underneath, and how well it's hidden by institutions, that's the reason I related to how when we were given Black History Month, that it was given reluctantly. It was given, it was a tremendous fight. But the point is that the reality was that there was, what was won was time, and that this system is constantly, out to win time and not to change and progress. All it wants to do is to make sure that, there's a group that's just moving ahead, always just moving ahead. But all you have to do is evaluate it with the very simple gap. Right now, Black people earn 58% of what white people earn. And guess what? 58% is still 3/5 of a human being.
Jan, I'll turn it over to you. As just before I turn it to you, Daniel Lander says to you, Professor Kirkland, you have dropped all these gems of knowledge for us, and I am trying to just catch them all. Over to you, Janet.
Cynthia, thank you for that. And Dr. Kirkland, like many people in this audience, you've taken me back to my days sitting in your classroom, thinking about the problems of our society in different ways and being inspired to make the changes that I can. So on behalf of everyone here who loves you and just appreciates all that you've given to us in the field, thank you for joining us. I saw in the chat that there's a request to hear from you more, and we will have that coming on June 8th, more details to come. So to all of you out there, thank you for being a part of this conversation. Thank you for sharing your love and respect for Dr. Kirkland, and hope to see everybody very soon. Goodbye now.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Janet.
Thank you very much.
Bye.